testified on the bill many times. Our website's clear. We're not lying about what the act does. I've tried to lay it out in the Constitution very thoroughly. It's a very easily act to read, and there's nothing in what we put out about the act that's alike. And so when Stewart said that, I have to admit I was disappointed. But with regard to $200 million, well, I can tell you, maybe you move the decimal point to the left. Maybe 20 million might be a little more accurate. Probably it is more accurate. Well, it's certainly more accurate than 200 million, I can tell you that. 200 million's out here, it's closer to like down here. I will say that I thought he was referring to sometimes the rhetoric we do use when we talk about what the unions have spent in terms of electing certain pro-union senators overall. Senators in the last electoral race, 200 million to 400 million in terms of raw political spending. But I can tell you, we have spent nothing approaching 200 million. It's probably closer to around overall the business community 20 to 30. That would be staff time, advertising. Yeah, we spent that. We went up in Arkansas. We went up in Pennsylvania to try to put Senator Specter and Lincoln and Pryor and others. So we spent some money on it. I can tell you the unions have spent a lot of money.
One last question.
We only have 5 minutes left, so.
Thank you.
Okay, one last
I might note when I was in Louisiana and other states I've traveled in, I've seen lots of union-supported ads on behalf of EFCA, so I'm not sure you disclosed how much the AFL-CIO or Change to Win have spent, but it's not been insubstantial.
Yes.
This is for Mr. Acuff primarily. Anytime we mess with social legislation, we have a lot of emotional loading in it, and you express your side view very persuasively, I think. I'm going to ask you to tone down the rhetoric a bit and think about this. Aren't you concerned a bit if you would succeed with the Free Choice Act that you'll actually fail? Because you're going to end up organizing smaller employers in industries where there has historically been very little union activity, and their economic position in the market is not currently affected by the cost increases they're going to see if you actually succeed. And particularly since so many people compete with foreign sources where there is no equivalent union balance, aren't you sort of afraid, sir, that you're going to organize people who are going to then find their company going out of business?
I'd answer that in 3 ways. It is a fallacy to think that workers want to bargain their employers out of business. That's just not true. The United Automobile Workers took two concessionary contracts in 6 months, renegotiated concessionary contracts with GM to save that company. And they have worked very hard to save Chrysler. Ford is doing as well as one could hope for. That's one. 2, on the foreign competition. Let me just, where does that logically end? Do you want American workers to compete with employers in the Caribbean basin who send 13-year-old girls to factory dorms? Do you want American workers to compete with Indonesia and Pakistan who send 9 and 10-year-old children to factories to fill Walmart? Do you want American workers to compete with China, which still uses prison labor? Or do you want American workers to compete with Western Europe and Canada, where workers have the free right to form unions, the freedom to form unions and bargain collectively, and where their economies are doing better than ours, certainly? And then on the last part of the question, let me just say this. I'm not going to say that this bill will not result in some small businesses getting organized. Clearly, there will be small businesses where there's a lot of worker anger, where workers will be able to self-organize. But the labor movement as a whole is interested in organizing those employers that are big enough to change the labor market within industries. And since the economy of the United States has changed so dramatically in the last 30 years, from a manufacturing economy to a service sector economy to now some people say a financial services economy, we believe those workers in the new sectors of the economy, the growing sectors of the economy, should have the same freedom to form unions and bargain collectively as the workers had in the industrial economy of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And finally, let me say this. We also believe that this act will help take wages out of competition to the point raised by the union representative back here, so that companies don't compete on who can best exploit their labor, but companies compete on who can best provide a product, who can best provide it on time, who can best serve the customer, so that we lift the economy from the bottom and the middle. We know what trying to lift the economy from the top does. It just shears it off, and all of the advances in GDP and economic growth go to the folks at the top.
I think that the applause might indicate that Stewart answered the question and shared his closing with us, so maybe we'll ask Randy to respond to the question with his closing as well, and that'll keep us on time, and then we'll give them applause for both of their wonderful performance today.
Well, I think the Employee Free Choice Act is an answer to the decline in union membership. I think the unions look at the decline as, well, we're getting less members, so we need to change the rules in terms of recruiting members. It's the same rules that they could quite successfully on over the past 2 decades, and I would just humbly suggest that perhaps the unions just need to find a new message rather than badgering employers as the bad guys, because I don't think most employees are buying into that message anymore. They worked in the 30s, worked when up in Sinclair wrote the jungle. It just doesn't have the traction anymore. Times have changed, and the union rhetoric hasn't kept up with it. It ain't the law. Maybe there's some nits on the side that need to be improvements, but it's not the law. It's the message. Secondly, regarding the Employee Free Choice Act, I know you of it. It was written back when frankly, the Republicans were running Congress, and I would doubt that ever who wrote it thought it would see the light of day, because it's such an overreaching, poorly drafted piece of legislation. I would have to say it just was not carefully thought through.
I knew it would see the light of day, man.
Well, it's seen the light of day, but not going to see the president's desk. I've been doing this stuff for a while. Normally, our debate on labor issues with the unions has occurred, I say, between the 40-yard lines. No one's questioned the basic structure of these laws, whether it's discrimination laws or the NLRA. But we've had good faith some fun negotiations between the 40-yard lines. And the Employee Free Choice Act is truly a radical revision of the way our nation's employment laws are structured. There's a whole lot of other stuff that's coming behind that act that's sort of being backed up. I will say, just on behalf of the employer community, that we tend to debate these laws in isolation. Employers have to, however, comply with them one after the other. And particularly when we're digging ourselves out of an economic recession, and it's not the time for Congress to be changing the laws and putting new mandates on employers. What is the Employee Free Choice Act or a lot of these other laws that are backed up, which would be subject to a whole other debate at Indiana University at some point. Looking forward to the next 2 months. I think we're going to see some interesting developments in the Senate. We will see some changes in organizing laws over the next 3 years. I feel like these have consequences.